Welcome to Insider. I'm Maayan Hoffman, Executive Editor of ILTV News. And as usual tonight, we're diving into some of the biggest questions facing Israel right now. Why did Israel continue the ceasefire without securing the release of more hostages? Has Hamas once again outmaneuvered Israel? And with 72.5% of Israelis saying Prime Minister Netanyahu should resign, is his leadership in real jeopardy? We'll also look at how U.S. pressure is shaping Israel's decisions, whether the war in Gaza is truly at a standstill, and if another round of fighting is inevitable. Joining me to break it all down are two top analysts, Ruth Wasserman Lande, former Knesset member and senior fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy, and Noga Tarnopolsky, Jerusalem correspondent for France 24. Welcome to both of you. So I want to go ahead and get started with the issue of the ceasefire. We have been carrying on the ceasefire agreement for really the last 2 weeks, not fighting in Gaza like we were allotted to by President Trump, like we should have been if we were not getting hostages back. Yet no hostages have come home. Can you explain to me, Ruth, what is going on? Was this some kind of strategic miscalculation on Israel's part?
First of all, I think that time was given to any kind of attempts, negotiations, pressures allotted and communicated by the Trump administration towards the mediators, both Qatar and Egypt, as well as the Hamas itself. I think that it's almost inevitable that the fighting will rehappen unless some very unexpected development will take place in terms of Hamas's willingness to free any of the hostages, which is what should happen truly at this particular stage. Otherwise, it's almost inevitable. Also, there has been an attempt to try removing humanitarian aid as well as cutting off the very last remainder of the electricity to the Gaza Strip. So we'll have to see whether that plays itself correctly in terms of pressing the Hamas, or, as we have seen thus far, less so. And it does seem, and Noga, maybe you can take this, though, is that while we're putting some pressure, cutting off that last pipeline or making statements about aid trucks that may or may not go in the end of the day, Hamas seems to be winning this negotiation battle. It's Ramadan. If we go back to 2024, we saw the same situation. They somehow managed to get a ceasefire during Ramadan, and then the hostages stopped being released. Here we are again. How come the terror group is dictating the terms of engagement?
I don't believe that a terror group is dictating the terms of this engagement. And I don't think Hamas has won. I think Israel has lost, and I think it's a self-inflicted loss. The elephant in the room, what's missing in our discussion, is an acknowledgement that Israel is in absolute and brazen breach of an international agreement monitored by the United States, which it signed. So the State of Israel signed that negotiations for Phase 2 would start on day 16 of Phase 1. Israel walked away cavalierly as though there was no commitment. Israel committed to redeploying its forces and to abandoning what's called the Philadelphia corridor, the Gaza-Egypt border, on day 42. We ignored that completely. Israel is trampling on an existing agreement and trying to conjure up fantasies of a better agreement. But Hamas doesn't want to give it a better agreement, and Hamas has a signed deal in hand. So we are at a standstill, by and large, caused by Israel. And I would agree with you, very bad for Israel, very mismanaged by Israel. But I don't think this is something Hamas has accomplished.
Oh, that's very interesting. Do you agree with that sentiment?
It's a very complex statement to agree with, but in a manner of speaking, yes, there has been a mismanagement. The agreement to begin with was absolutely awful. What it did achieve is bring hostages back, which at this point in time is the most important thing. We need those people back before anything truly will move forward. Plus, it would be very useful and very advisable to have a strategy as in, what do we want that terrible term, the day after, to look like? whom do we want or do not want in the Gaza Strip? And I leave nothing out in terms of creativity, either moving Palestinians out from the Gaza Strip. What is the role played by Egypt and or other countries in the region? I'm not in favor of moving any of the Palestinians towards Egypt and or Jordan. I think it would be a terrible move for Israel. But first and foremost, we need to get them back. It would free Israel from the cables it's in and the chains it's in now. But it's also the moral responsibility of any government to first bring them back.
But what incentive does Hamas have?
It doesn't. It has no incentive whatsoever, either with a deal or without the deal, to bring them back, because it's the only thing that it has, and that is it. Particularly now with the Trump administration being adamant against Hamas, and very strongly so, it has absolutely no incentive whatsoever.
So do you believe that we can get the hostages home?
I do believe that we can get the hostages back home. I just want to express my surprise at the statement we've just heard. The Trump administration, their top hostage official 2 days ago referred to Hamas as great guys just like us. It is true that he got walloped for it by Israeli officials.
And Americans.
No, we are really nurturing here a little bit of an Israeli fantasy scene. It is true that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, following immense, vast Israeli pressure, made a teeny tiny statement, not really noted anywhere in the United States. But the United States is clearly on another path. It has other interests. He also said, and I think Israelis should be paying attention, he said, we are not, how did he put it? He said, sorry, I'm forgetting the exact quote, but he said, we don't follow Israeli interests, we have our own interests. We're not an agent, we're not an agent of Israel, we have our own agent. Israel should be listening. Instead of having a conniption fit, instead of us having members of Knesset, as today a minister of the state of Israel, saying that the good Lord brought us this American administration and is telling us to take our lands back home. Instead of this entertaining lunacy, we should try and adhere to reality. I do think that there is a way to get the hostages back home. I think Israel has to pull itself together. I think we shouldn't have to compare Israel, which used to be an ordered state, which used to adhere to the rule of law. We shouldn't be comparing Israel that signed an international agreement to a murderous, lunatic Islamist terror group.
Well, and I think you brought up something that's very important that I'd like each of you to respond to, which is regarding the American administration. There's a tremendous amount of American pressure on Netanyahu, on the government to carry out the will or the whims of the U.S. administration. And by and large, the Israeli government says to say, if they say jump, the government is saying how high. Is that impacting our ability to have sound decision making? And would we be better off making our own decisions about how to move forward, either with these negotiations, or as you said, it's not a matter of if, but when, maybe we need to exert more military pressure?
I think that there is something that is comparable in the interests of the United States current administration and the Israeli government, not necessarily out of strategy, but because it so happens to be, and that is the will to return the hostages, whether it's for credit and showing or for moral responsibility and or pressure from the street in Israel. And that should be done. How it should be done, that remains to be seen. I don't believe that the Hamas will let go of all of the hostages, as I have said, because it's the only really bargaining chip that they have. But I do believe that if we have enough patience and the hostages don't have that time, the humanitarian aid that has stopped flowing in has increased significantly the price of goods and food on the market. There's no shortage, but the idea that there will be a shortage has made the prices go up. Plus, there's an issue of energy. So it's the electricity, the water, the petrol, the gas that is going in has stopped. That will pressure Hamas with time. Should the Hamas give in to this pressure? from its stance, no. But with American pressure and with Israeli continuation of this movement, it can bring more hostages back home. And that is the first step. And by the way, the Americans and the Israelis agree on that should be done prior to anything else, because there is no time left. Then a strategy needs to be adopted, for sure.
What about military action? Do you think, Noga, that, you're saying we need to adhere to the contract? We're obviously not adhering to what we signed. If we're anyway not going to adhere to it, many are calling to just go back in. Let's just fight some more.
What does that mean?
Well, I don't know.
When you say fight some more, should we go, what are we talking about?
Well, I mean, clearly...
Gaza's in ruins.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Clearly, we didn't do a good job for the last 17 months.
Well, I'm not sure that that's true. I think that, again, it's difficult to say this, but I think that Israel, which is ever more isolated internationally and ever more isolated somehow psychologically, I think we have adopted a way of looking at this conflict which is unfortunately completely separate, on a parallel line in another universe from the way everybody else, friend or foe on Earth, sees it. So we also should have been listening to Adam Bowler when he congratulated Israel, as President Biden did almost a year ago, and he said, congratulations, you won. You destroyed Hezbollah, you destroyed Hamas, you've done the whole world a favor. And that, even though it's politically inconvenient for the Israeli government, that's the reality. Israel bashed these organizations to kingdom come. There is nothing left for the Israeli army to do in Gaza operationally.
I don't think that's true. I'm sorry.
I want to finish with one sentence. Israel is, I believe, without question, one of the most powerful armies on earth. It bashed Gaza nonstop for a period of 15 months. If that didn't get the hostages out, and it did not one came out because of that kind of force. I think speaking about, you have to be a little delusional to think that doing it again, doing it more, doing it when it's already destroyed is going to have a better outcome.
So this is, I don't want to disagree with that, because I do think that after 15 months, while we flattened 80% of Gaza, we didn't take care of the tunnel infrastructure, but we didn't bash Hamas enough. Hamas is still ruling Gaza. We saw when the hostages came out how many terrorists were there to cheer them on in uniforms. Lower level, we got the leadership.
I want to discuss
that.
They
will resurface.
I want to discuss that. There are ways of getting rid of Hamas, and there are also ways of not falling for Hamas, propaganda. And we saw Hamas images, very unfortunate, very painful Hamas images when the hostages were released. We also saw drone images made by very brave Gazan individuals from up high, showing that, in fact, there weren't thousands of people in those close-ups. There were maybe a few hundred. Okay, and the way to get rid of Hamas, which we have known and which has been recommended to the Israeli government for years, is replace them. Allow someone else in. Replace them with someone else. Now, you don't have to be in love, maybe, with the opponent, but we know what Hamas is.
So allow me to respond, please. First of all, we had not bashed Hamas enough. Whether bashing them more in combat would get more hostages out? Not necessarily. As I said, first we need to get the hostages out. Then we need to not only bash Hamas, which is not bashed enough, but the propaganda that we tell ourselves is that Gaza is completely destroyed. That is not true at all. There are markets, there are shopping malls, there are houses.
I said
the fact
Hamas is destroyed.
No, it's not destroyed. It's not destroyed, and I insist on that. It's completely not destroyed, and the humanitarian aid, the gas and the energy that is coming in from Qatar, and the parts that are being allowed by the Israeli government with pressure from the international arena to go into the Gaza Strip is helping them to become even less bashed than before, but they are not bashed at all. Now, replacing the Hamas with another government is unfortunately a very, very poor solution, because they'll do what they did in 2005, and they will do it without a doubt. Why? Because they feel that they are there is a providence behind them telling them religiously that that is what they must do. This is not a national movement. This is a religiously oriented movement that is to create a caliphate based on Sharia. That means Egypt, Jordan, Israel, the West, etc. The Fatah for them is a non-entity. It is a disallowed, non-Muslim enough entity that cannot rule. They will rule from behind or from the tunnels that we have not yet destroyed. And that's a completely non-relevant solution, which Egypt, by the way, is pushing to get the area into more stability from its point of view.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, what do you believe that the Israeli army has been doing in Gaza for the last 17 months? You said Hamas is not destroyed at all. What has the IDF been doing for the last 17 months?
So the IDF has been weakening Hamas significantly, but unfortunately not enough. It has not destroyed enough of the tunnel network underground. It has flattened certain areas of the Gaza Strip, and unfortunately, with the civilian Gazans currently in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, there is a huge difficulty because the Hamas is embedding itself within that civilian population. The idea that needs to be carried out, at least immediately, is to create a buffer zone in the northern part of the Gaza Strip so that people with children who want to move back into the southern part of Israel, into Otef Aza of Israel, can move back and not have nightmares that any moment somebody is going to come rape, massacre, and murder them.
100%. And that is really the follow-up question, which is, you know, I was looking at this new Israel Democracy Institute poll, and among many other data points that it put out, it was actually that 73% of Israelis do support a second stage of fighting. They expect us to go in and to fight again. Or, I'm sorry, the opposite. I just said that they support a second stage. I got that completely backwards.
Of the agreement.
Of the agreement. 73%, right, I got it completely opposite. 73% expect a ceasefire to continue. Now, how do you reconcile that? Going into the war, we said we have to demolish Hamas militarily and politically and bring all the hostages home. We have not brought all the hostages home. We clearly haven't won in that front. But as you just said, we also haven't won on the Hamas front. How do these people go back to their homes? But yet, Israelis are saying, okay, it's enough. We don't want to fight anymore. So what do you do with that?
Israelis didn't say they don't want to fight anymore. Israelis said bring the hostages home.
They said they support moving to the second stage of the ceasefire at any cost.
Continue the second stage of the ceasefire to bring the hostages home.
At any cost.
At any cost, which means the end of the war. But with all respect, and really with all respect, since when do we stop warring? Because the day after, they're going to throw rockets onto our heads, meaning that they will stop the ceasefire themselves. They say it in Arabic every day. They show it. They arm themselves. They show it. So instead of pretending that it's not like that by bringing in the Fatah, which is, by the way, inciting and indoctrinating its people not less terribly than the Hamas, let's not pretend. Let's bring the hostages home. Stop the fighting. Bring everybody home, or at least as many as possibly realistic. And then do what needs to be done, and that's complex, in order to make sure that Hamas is no longer there and that there is a re-education, that the indoctrination of the past 20 years is reversed, which is going to take at least a decade.
Noga, final statements from at the end of the show. What do you want to respond?
I want to go back to the very important poll you just cited. A vast and stable majority of Israelis for more than a year have wanted an end to this war, to bring the hostages home, and this government to leave. The people of Israel, this vast majority, are getting none of those at the moment. And what we see, you know, when we hear talk of a return to war, the assumption lying behind that is, I think, a shaky one right now. We're seeing in Israel something we've never, ever seen before. We're seeing a quiet quitting of reservists. We're seeing soldiers whose parents say, don't go to the army, go to London. We are seeing a vast amount of reservists not showing up. So I think, and we're seeing a government trying to enshrine in law draft dodging arrangement for its political allies. So I'm not sure Israel has that option in the way that we speak about it as if we had a full active army at our reach. And I know that the people of Israel don't want it, and I think that should be a major calculation at this point.
Wow, there is so much that we have to unpack here, but unfortunately we are at the end of our time, and that is all the time that we have this evening. I want to thank both of our guests for being here tonight. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching Insider. Have a safe and pleasant evening.